Today's daf we're going to be learning is Bava Metzia daf tzadi. We're going to get really deep into this whole isur of lo tachsom shor b'disho, not the prohibition to muzzle. When does it apply? When does it not apply? Can you have a Gentile do it for you? All sorts of questions. Some of them we'll have answers to, some of them we won't. We're going to start our daf with a contradiction between two sources. Tanu Rabbanan, we're starting from the last few words on daf Peitet and Mebet. Parot hamiraksot b'tfuah. Not exactly clear what this is. Some of the commentaries say that what's going on here is we normally think of threshing. Okay, you have the stalks of wheat. You bring them with the stalk. The whole thing is all together. You bring it to the threshing floor. The animals trample on it, and then it separates the wheat from the chaff, and then you do the winnowing, and then you end up with these two separate piles. So some people say what we're talking about here is a later stage. After that, you end up with the two piles. You end up with all your chaff that's blown off to the side, and you're left with a pile of the grains. Now, even then, there's still sometimes some of the, what do you call it, the peel or the outer, there's a shell still on the grain. And to get that off, sometimes they would also do threshing, but that's not the typical threshing that we're talking about. Some people say it's just the parot happened to be walking in a place. It's unclear exactly what this is, but it's an atypical manner. Or the next is hadashot truma maaser, or they're threshing on top of truma and maaser, which normally truma and maaser we do later. In other words, the truma and maaser is taken after already the threshing is done. Again, the question is, what's the issue here? We're going to basically see in a minute. Maybe I'll just continue and then I'll give you the different opinions. Eino over mishum bal tachsom. Neither of these two cases is an issue of bal tachsom, meaning you don't have to muzzle your animal. This isn't what the Torah was referring to. So what's the dashot truma maaser? Some people say, why is there no isur lo tachsom? Some people say because it says, this is Tosfot, says lo tachsom shor b'disho, in its threshing, when it's threshing his stuff, meaning when it's threshing the owner's stuff, not when it belongs to somebody else. Now, once I separate the truma and the maaser, it doesn't belong to me anymore. It belongs to the kohen, belongs to the Levi. That's not mine. So that's a possible explanation. Another explanation could be that we have a problem with truma or maaser because the animal is not allowed to eat the truma and maaser, right? The animal, it's given to the kohen, it's given to the Levi. So if the animal can't eat it, then of course we're allowed to muzzle the animal. There's no prohibition to muzzle it because the animal's not supposed to be eating it. Some people say it's because it's at a later stage also, that at that point, like for the worker, there was Gemar Malacha at a certain stage, right? That once it's already ready for maaser, then the worker can't eat it. Perhaps likewise, the animal can't eat it at that stage either. Anyway, a bunch of different opinions why this is. The bottom line and the part that's going to be important for us later is that particularly this dash betruma of a maaser, there's no bal tachsom. The first case is probably because, again, it's atypical, it's a later stage, and that would have to be the reason why they're exempt. But it adds here in this bright time, this is a line we're going to come back to later, the second part of this, which is aval mipnei mar'ita ayin mevi bul me'oto amin v'tolela b'tchas galin shebefia. But it doesn't look good. Okay, maybe, first of all, people don't know necessarily it's truma and maaser, and they see you muzzling your animal while it's eating. So you should bring perhaps a bowl is a fistful of food of that type. So if it's barley, then barley. If it's wheat, wheat. Fill up this troskelin and put it in its mouth. This is kind of like a bag. Hang a bag on the mouth of the animal, and that way the animal has something to eat while it's threshing. So while on the one hand, you can prevent it from eating, you can muzzle it, but allow it to have some food there, put a little sack, by its mouth and let the animal eat. Rabbi Simai bar Yochai Omer, this is the line we're going to get back to later. Rabbi Simai bar Yochai Omer, mevi karshinin, you bring vetch, it's a particular type of growth, v'tolelas shekarshinim yafot laminakol. What he seems to mean is, according to the Tanakama, you have to bring that type. According to Rabbi Simai bar Yochai, you can bring that type, or let's say it's eating grains, you could bring vetch and put the vetch in the bag because the vetch is the healthiest thing there is for animals. So either, in other words, in the end, and we're going to come back to this idea, the whole idea of this halacha is doing what's best for the animal. So in the sense, the animal should have been eating wheat, but you can't give it the wheat because it's truma, or you don't have to. So you give it wheat and it's in the food bag. But on the other hand, if fetch is better for the animal, since all we want is what's best for the animal, therefore you can also give it fetch. Urimini. Back to our main thing though. It said in this source that if the animal is threshing in truma and maaser produce, there's no prohibition of muzzling. But that contradicts the following source. And here we'll see a whole bunch of halachot. One of them is truma maaser, and it's going to say there is a prohibition. That matches the first halacha. If they're the cows are, again, maybe doing this later stage of threshing, which is not the typical threshing. By the way, the reason to say if it's this later stage, it means that when the Torah said dash, it wasn't talking about this kind of threshing, because this was an atypical kind of threshing. They were talking about the main threshing of separating the wheat from the chaff. So now that so far matches up. But now it says, here it says it very clearly, there is a prohibition. But now we're going to get into some other halachot. A Gentile, because we're just quoting a Braita, we're going to quote the whole Braita, but we're done for what we needed it for. If a Gentile comes into your field and threshes with your animal, that's not a problem, because the Gentile is doing it, right? It's all about who's doing it, and there's no prohibition for a Gentile. If you take an animal of a Gentile's and you muzzle it, it has nothing to do with who owns the animal. It has to do with who's doing the action. So if a Jew's doing the action, of course, it's forbidden. So now we go back and we just point out kasha truma, kasha maaser. And they're particularly splitting them because we're going to split them in the answers. Even though truma maaser were together just a minute ago, now they're going to say, well, there's a contradiction truma to truma, there's a contradiction maaser to maaser. In each source, right? The first source said there's no prohibition. The second source says it's prohibited. So now we're going to try to resolve it. Bishlama truma, a truma lokashi. Truma, the truma contradiction, we're going to resolve pretty quickly. Kam bitruma, kam begidule truma. There's truma, regular truma. Regular truma is for the kohen, can't eat it. So therefore you can muzzle the animal, of course, because the animal's not supposed to be eating it anyway. But there's something called gidule truma. Gidule truma is, if I have truma, I separated my truma, and I didn't give it to the kohen, but I replanted it. And now something grew from that. What's its status? By Torah law, it's not truma. But by rabbinic law, it's truma. So it could be that the second source, when it said, if they're threshing with truma, what they meant is something that grew from a truma product, which is called truma, but it's only truma on a rabbinic level. If it's truma on a rabbinic level, from a Torah perspective, this isn't truma. And this is a Torah law, don't muzzle your animal. So there you'd be forbidden to muzzle your animal to prevent your animal from eating this dirabanan level, rabbinic level truma. That's an easy answer. And we'll see in a minute why you can't answer the same thing by maaser. So the Gemara started off with a bishlama. That means this works fine and well, but ela maaser kasha. But we still have an issue with the maaser. We don't have an easy way to resolve it. To which the Gemara says, so we're going to have 4 answers. The first one we're going to immediately reject. It's already introduced as, and if you want to say, maaser nami lo kasha kam b'maaser kam b'gidulei maaser. Okay, answer it the same way. There's growths from maaser. Bishlama gidulei truma. That we understand, because truma is something that if I took a truma, let's say a garlic that was truma, and I planted it, and out from there grew more garlics. That is called truma. But if I took something that was maaser, the tithe for the Levi, or maaser sheni, we'll see, which we'll talk about in a minute. But I took that and I planted it. It has no sanctity whatsoever. It is not called maaser even. It's called chulin. So the source wouldn't refer to gidulei maaser as maaser. It would refer to gidulei truma as truma, because on a rabbinic level, it's called truma. But it wouldn't refer to gidulei maaser as maaser. So therefore, it can't be. How do we know this? Ditnan, there's a Mishnah that says it in Truma. Gidule tevel, v'gidule maaser sheni chulin. Okay, if you take tevel, untithed produce, and you replant it, or you take maaser sheni, which is in the first, second, 4th, and 5th years of the Shemitah cycle, you take your second maaser, after you take the first maaser, which goes to the Levi, you then take another tenth, right? Maaser is a tenth, take another tenth, and you're supposed to bring it to Jerusalem. Remember, you can also redeem it on a coin, bring it to Jerusalem. Well, if you plant it instead, it's chulin, and therefore it's not maaser, and therefore that can't be the resolution. So attempt number one didn't work. But now we're going to have three other possible answers. Ela lo kasha, haba maaser rishon, haba maaser sheni. Which way this goes, there's a debate. We'll go with a simple explanation. Maaser rishon goes to the Levi, maaser sheni has to be eaten in Jerusalem. Now, even though it has to go to the Levi, maaser rishon, there are people who say if a non-Levi eats it, it's not like a non-Kohen eating truma, which is a definite prohibition. But perhaps it can be eaten by other people, and therefore maaser rishon is less of an issue. And therefore, if it's less of an issue, it means the animal can eat it, which means you can't muzzle your animal. And that's the second source. Maaser sheni, which has to be brought to Jerusalem, and according to some, has sanctity to it, okay, is considered mamon gavoa, considered like belonging to God, which we'll see in a minute, this whole debate about it, that the animal can't eat. First of all, the animal's not in Jerusalem, right? The food's not in Jerusalem. And since the animal can't eat it, you can actually muzzle the animal. So that's one way of looking at it. Third answer. Could be they're both maaser sheni. What's the difference? Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda. So now instead of it being a different situation, which is the way we keep suggesting, we're now going to say it's a different opinion. Someone holds this, someone holds that. What's the difference, Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda? What do they hold? Ha Rabbi Meir da'amal maaser sheni mamon gavoa. Rabbi Meir holds the maaser sheni has sanctity to it. Now, again, you have to remember, what do? You take a tithe, right? You take a tenth. You then redeem it on a coin. You take the coin to Jerusalem. You then, in Jerusalem, you buy things with it, and then you eat it yourself. So in a sense, it's yours. On the other hand, you have to eat it in Jerusalem. So in a sense, it's God's, right? It has the sanctity to it. So that's the debate between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. What is it? So Rabbi Meir holds that it's mamon gavoa. It's like it belongs to God, even though you get to eat it, but it's like, okay, it's got sanctity to it, which means if you hold the stricter opinion that it's mamon gavoa, then you're going to say the animal cannot eat it, basically. And we're going to say there's no isur, there's no prohibition of lo tachsom, of muzzling your animal, because your animal can't eat it anyway. And the other opinion that said, the first Mishnah that said, in over mishum bal tachsom, is Rabbi Yehuda. Damar maaser sheni mamon hedyot. Sorry, that was the first one. That was Rabbi Meir. The second source that said maaser is forbidden to muzzle your animal. That's because it's like Rabbi Yehuda, who says maaser sheni mamon hedyotu. It's just really like your property. If it's like anything else in your property, well, then the animal, you can't forbid, it's forbidden to muzzle the animal. Okay, and that would be the second source where it says it's just like anything else because it's mamon hedyot. Okay, before we get to the fourth answer, we're now going to just ask a question about this. Hey, Chidani, how did you end up in a situation where you had maaser sheni produce that was being threshed? To which they answer, Kigon shikdi mo b'shiboli. Well, generally, you take the maaser and truma later. But in this case, you must have taken it earlier when it was still in the piles, right, with all the stalks. Ula Rabbi Yehuda, so now they're going to say, wait, we have another question, though. According to Rabbi Yehuda, how could the animal be eating this maaser? Because habai choma, even if you call it mamon hedyot, it still needs to go to Jerusalem, and you have to eat it in Jerusalem. So how could that possibly be? Kigon shedash lifnim michomat beit pagi. There must be that your situation is, and Rashi explains that, what are we talking about, Beit Pagi? And if you want to learn more about Beit Pagi, Shuli Mishkan has a whole article about it. So in Flashback, I recommend you read it. Rashi says that Beit Pagi was this area that they annexed, they kind of added on to Jerusalem. It was on the outskirts, on the perimeter, and they added it in as part of the city boundaries. And that's why you could have this case where this person is threshing in Beit Pagi. Fourth answer, what's that? Well, there's maaser that we know is maaser. I took maaser on something and it hadn't been tithed before. And then we have what's called maaser demai. Now that's a case where I bought crops from Amaretz, from a person who We don't know if they keep halacha or not. We don't know if they're careful about maaser. We know that they're not careful about all sorts of things. We just don't know, was this maaser or not. And I then take maaser again. And then my animal's threshing this stuff. Now, the animal's threshing this. It's not necessarily maaser, because it could be, right, that the person before already took the maaser. It's called damai, right? We don't know what it is. So it's only by rabbinic law, because it's a suffix, it's only by rabbinic law going to be considered maaser. So again, on a Torah level, it's not maaser, which means on a Torah level, you have the Torah prohibition of lo tachsom shor b'disho, don't muzzle the animal. So if it's demai, we say it's still forbidden. If it's definite maaser, then it's permitted. And that was the first source. So that was answer number 4, to which the Gemara now says, once you came up with that answer, we can actually forget about gidule truma. That was a weak answer, because you're basically saying it says truma really only means something, a growth from truma. So why don't you just say not truma nami lokasha truma vadai truma demai. Just say there's truma definite and there's truma there was demai truma. To which the Gemara says, what could possibly be demai truma? Bishlama maaser demai ika. We have such a concept of maaser of demai. Ela truma demai miika. Do we have such a thing of truma demai? In a minute, we'll see we do. First, we're going to see there's a problem, because the Hatanya, as a brighter that talks about Yochanan Kohen Gadol, who decided at a certain point, afhu bitel, we learned this at the end of Masechet Sotan, afhu bitel et havidui, because Aral hadamai, lefisha shalach b'chol gvul Yisrael v'ra'ah shelo hayu mafrishim ela truma gdola bilvad. He said, no more vidui masla, because people weren't doing it. And then people were doing, year 4 and year 7 of the Shemitah cycle, you have to get up and make this declaration. I took care of all my truma and my maaser. And he said, really the maaser. And he said, but people aren't, and they're just lying. They're doing this ceremony, this ritual, which you can imagine, right? People are just used to, we do this ritual, but they're not paying attention to the words, and the words are total lies. He said, no more. We're just canceling it. And that's why there is no vidui maaser anymore, because of him. And gazar al hadamai. And he said, the truth is, I don't know if we do, I'm trying to remember now, do we do any sort of vidui maaser? I don't remember. But he also was gazar al hadamai. But he said, anything you buy from an asserts, you have to take maaser on. So what does it say here, though? Because he saw, and he did a survey, and he saw that people were only taking truma gedola. So, okay, I see, Julie, you're saying we did do it. So it could be we do it now. Okay, for some reason I don't remember anymore. But so now we say, he said people were only taking truma gedola, which means they weren't taking truma gedola. They just weren't taking maaser. So there is no such thing as truma demai. He said demai is for maaser. Every time we say this, right? So we're worried the ours aren't taking maaser. Truma they do take. So how could you say truma demai, truma vadai? So they say, oh no, elalo kasha, kamba truma maaser vadai, kamba truma maaser demai. There's 2 trumas. One truma is the truma you take on your produce at the beginning. You take 1/50th or 1/40th or 1/60th, and you take that out. That everyone was doing. But then they stopped after, because first of all, it's a very small amount. And they stopped. They didn't do the maaser. And then the maaser, if someone does give maaser to a Levi, the Levi has to take truma from the maaser, and that's 1/10. That's already a bigger amount. People don't like to take so much, right? That's the whole problem with the Amei Haaretz. They didn't want to lose so much money, so they just didn't do it. So the truma maaser that the Levi is supposed to take, that they weren't necessarily taking. And that's the truma we're talking about. That would be truma demai, and that would be our distinction. It's a possible answer. So with that, we finish our first sugya for today, which was to compare these 2 sources. One that said lo tachsom applies in the case of truma maaser, and one says it doesn't apply. And what's the resolution between the 2 sources? We saw 2 answers for the truma and 4 answers for the maaser, even though the first one we kind of knock off the list, so you could kind of say 3. Now we're going to have all sorts of interesting questions, getting more into the concept of the parameters of lo tachsom shor b'disha. What is the reason for this mitzvah, and why is that relevant? Well, what if your animal is threshing and eating, and as it's eating, it's having some stomach issues and there's diarrhea coming out? Sounds unpleasant on the threshing floor. This is going on, but that's not what's bothering us. What's bothering us is the food is bad for the animal. If the food is bad for the animal's eating, mishum de ma'ale lahu, is this halacha all because it's good for the animal to be eating while working? And halo ma'ale, but this food is not actually beneficial for the animal. O dilma de chazio umitstara, or do we view it as, and maybe this comes under tsar balei chayim, it's torture to have your animal working and not allow the animal to eat. And this animal sees food and wants to eat it. Now, the animal doesn't connect between, oh, this food is making me sick. And therefore, hachazi umitstara, the animal sees food and is pained because you're not letting the animal eat. So if you view it the second option, then you wouldn't be allowed to muzzle your animal here either. If you view the first option as it's what's good for the animal, and if it's not good for the animal, well, then you can't muzzle the animal, then you'd be allowed to. Let's learn it from this Tannaitic source that we quoted earlier today. Rabbi Simai ben Yochai Omer, mevi karshinin v'tolala, shakarshenin yafot labin hakol. What do we see here? You can bring veg because veg is better than anything, which means that what are we really looking out for? The best for the animal. So therefore, shma mina mishum de ma'ale lahu, it's because it's good for the animal to be able to eat while working. But if it's not, in this particular situation, because it's making the animal sick, then you're not prohibited from muzzling the animal, and you can actually muzzle the animal. Shma mina. It almost sounds like maybe even you're obligated to muzzle the animal to prevent the animal from eating this food that's bad for the animal. Okay, here's another question. Are you allowed to tell a Gentile, muzzle my animal and thresh in my with my crops? This is what we call amira la'akum, telling a Gentile to do something that is wrong for us. It's not prohibited for them. So therefore, can we tell them to do it? Mi amrinan, ki amrinan amira lanachri shvut. When we say amira lanachri is a shvut, shvut means it's rabbinic prohibition. You're not allowed to tell a Gentile to do something. And where do we say that? In Shabbat. So even though we have this concept of a goy shel Shabbat, right, a Shabbos goy, where you can have a Gentile do something for you, you can't actually tell them to do something. And it's very tricky in general when it's allowed, when it's not. But certainly telling them is a problem, maybe hinting, alluding, something, but not telling them, that's forbidden. So do we say that? Hanimile li'inyan Shabbat, di'isur skila, maybe that's just for Shabbos. Because laws of Shabbat, if you transgress them, you get stoned. That's very severe. But in this case, this is just a low tasik, not as severe. Low, maybe not. Maybe it's not forbidden. Odil malosh now, or maybe there's no difference. So the structure now is going to be, we're going to bring two sources, try to get to an answer. Is there a mira la'akum in a case like this, which is just a regular negative prohibition, doesn't have a more serious punishment other than lashes, or not? Okay, is it applicable? Is it not applicable here? But we're going to bring two sources to try to get to an answer. In the end, we're going to reject both sources and we're not going to end up with an answer. Tashma, let's learn from here. A Gentile who threshes using, we saw this before, using the cow of a Jew, it's not a problem. Now, what do you see here though? Listen to the language. Eino over. He does not transgress lo tachsom. The inference is me'aberhu de lo aver. He doesn't transgress it, but ha'isura ika, but it's still forbidden. Meaning he won't get lashes for it, but he shouldn't do it. Okay, you shouldn't take someone else's animal, right? Take a Jew's animal and thresh, right, with the animal muzzle. So it sounds like he shouldn't do it because it sounds like he's doing it for the Jew, and that would be like a mira la'akum. But the Gemara says, what do you mean? B'dinu d'isur nami leka. No, you could say, in over, he doesn't transgress, and it's not even prohibited at all. So why did it say in over? Should have just said mutal, it's permitted, or something like that. Well, I did Tane Sefa, Israel hadash beparatosh nokri over, Tanavesha in over. It was just using that language to compare it to the other case. The other case was the Jew takes the Gentile's animal and muzzles it, is forbidden. And that says over. So this said in over, he doesn't transgress, but it really doesn't, you can't infer from it that it's actually forbidden. Next source, Tashma. They asked the father of Shmuel the following question. We're going to turn out Amud Bet. Totally different topic, but it's a lo taseh about castrating animals. You're not allowed to castrate animals. Well, they asked the father of Shmuel, Halin Torah, Digan vin Aramai, Umiganchin yaton mayu. There are these Gentiles that are stealing, and it seems to be quote unquote stealing. Okay, they're as if they're stealing the Jews' animals, castrating them and then returning them. Let's talk about castration of animals. Castration of animals is good for the owner of the animals because then the animal is stronger and can work longer, better, okay, less distracted, and it's a stronger animal. It's better for the owner. So even though we've seen lots of sugyot where we have Gentiles who are trying to kill the Jews and we want to avoid them at all costs, we also have other Gentiles in the Gemara that help Jews. And these Gentiles are trying to help us by stealing from us. Why? Because what do? They kind of pretend to steal our animal. We let them because it's good for us. They castrate the animal and return it to the Jews. And now the Jews have castrated animals without having to do any prohibition of castrating the animal. So is this okay or not? Now, if this is okay, or if this is not okay, right? Let's say it's not okay. Then we're going to say, oh, well then, certainly you can't tell the nokri to do something, and this is just a lo taseh, and then we'd have an answer. So shalach lehu, he sent back to them. Ha'arame it avi behu. This is trickery. Okay, this is not okay. Ayarimu alayu v'izdam. So we'll do trickery back to you, and we'll force you to sell the animal. In other words, this is more like you would say a knas. He uses the same language of yarume, but anyone who does this now has to sell the animal. Because you wanted an animal that was going to work harder, well, we're penalizing you. I'm a Rav Papa. So what do you have? What do you see here? It's forbidden. If it's forbidden for the Gentile to do that, then of course it's forbidden for you to tell the Gentile to do something that's a lo taseh. But Rav Papa rejects the source and says, I'm Rav Papa b'nei ma'arav asaber like Rabbi Chidka. People in Israel hold like Rabbi Chidka, ta'amar b'nei Noach mitzuvim ala serus. We'll get to this in Sanhedrin. We always said the 7 Noachide laws. Well, in fact, there's not really 7, or not, at least according to everybody. There's many different opinions about what other mitzvot are included in the Noachide laws, and some people have more other numbers, not 7. One of the opinions there is Rabbi Chidka, who holds that one of the added ones is sirus, that they can't castrate animals either. Now, if the Gentile can't castrate animals, and they're basically taking our animals, castrating them, and returning them to us, then the Jew has actually transgressed something, because it's forbidden for you to put a stumbling block before someone. If you're allowing them to, so quote unquote, steal your animals, then you're actually enabling them to do something that's forbidden to them, because it's a Noachide law. So therefore, right, which means it's basically applicable to all Gentiles. So that's why this is forbidden, but that has nothing to do with our topic. So in the end, we don't have an answer. But we're going to, since we already got onto this castration topic and this issue of the penalty that you have to sell, the Gemara gets into some more details. Sava Rava Lememar, Yimachul L'Shchita. Rava thought this meant that you have to sell it for slaughtering. Now, what does that mean for slaughtering? Well, when you sell animals, you don't just sell them, but you sell, or let's say an oxen. Oxen are sold in 2 price ranges. They're sold for slaughter, and they're sold for working. Now, what happened? You improved the value of this animal by having the Gentiles steal it, and it can now, right, work better. So you'll make money if you sell it for work, because it's now worth more. This castrated animal is going to go for more. So therefore, in this penalty, Rava said, we can't allow you to sell it for work, because then you benefited from the castration. So you have to sell it for slaughtering, in which case the castration has no effect on the price, and you're going to get the same price for the animal no matter what. But Amrale, so now it started off with Sava Rava Lememar. Rava thought to say this, but Amrale Abaye says, what are you talking about? It was enough that we penalize them, not that they have to sell. In other words, the Jews who wanted their animals castrated wanted it so the animals could work for them. It wasn't that, okay, we want to increase the financial value of the animal for when we sell it. That wasn't what they wanted. So it was enough to penalize them and just to say you have to sell it. That was enough of a penalty. If they make a little more money on it, it's fine. Another thing, pshita beno gadol ki acher gam. Obviously, you can sell it to your son. Now we're going to see there's all sorts of ways of getting around this whole thing, which is you can sell it to your own son. Okay, that works because he's considered someone different. Some people say older son means financially independent. Beno katamai, what if about your young son who's not financially independent? Your son is financially dependent on you. Can you sell it to him? It seems a little ridiculous. You'd be able to do that. And Rav Achai, in fact, Asar, said no way. But Rav Ashi Share, he actually permitted this. And here you see that they kind of instituted this penalty, but then found ways to get around it. Okay, and allowed you to sell it to your own son who's dependent on you, and somehow that works. Seems a little fishy, but okay. And we also see that there are ways of getting around this because Meremer, Merzutra, Va'amr Lehanu Tre Chaside, either Meremer or Merzutra, who are big Talmudei Chachamim, or two Hasidim, pious people, Mechalfei Hadadin. Now they're particularly bringing pious people to Talmudei Chachamim to show this is actually okay. It's a way of circumventing again. What would they do? The Gentiles would take their animals, castrate them, give it back. They'd have to sell it. So Meremer would sell Merzutra his animal, and Merzutra would sell Meremer his animal. In the end, they would end up with an animal that could work better. So it seems a little not appropriate, but I guess they feel like this is already more removed, and technically they did it according to the halacha, so it seems to be that the Gemara thinks this is okay. Some people say this is really not okay, and maybe their families did it and they didn't know, and somehow tried to remove them from the story because it doesn't really look like something two pious people would do. But anyway, there's some questions to be asked there. By Rami Bar Hama. Next set of questions. He asks a whole set of questions. Some of them we're going to reject and say they're not even questions. It's obvious. And the rest of them we're not going to have answers to. Hoshiv kots b'fi hamahu. We're now going to talk about all different kinds of things that could be considered chasima, could be not considered muzzling. Okay, is this muzzling? Is it not? You put, okay, now we normally think of a muzzle. You put, right, some type of thing over the mouth of the animal that's going to prevent the animal from eating. What if you put a thorn in its mouth, which makes it impossible for the animal to eat? So the Gemara says, if you put it in there, chasima that is no better chasima than doing that. A chasima doesn't need to be the muzzle, what we normally think of a muzzle. A chasima could be anything that prevents the animal from eating. If you put it in there, problem. Ella, okay, so now they're going to reframe the question. Yashav lakotz b'fi amahu. What if it had a thorn in its mouth and now can't eat? So now, are we going to say you can't thresh with the animal, or you didn't put the muzzle in, so it's okay? Or what if you put a lion up to scare the animal, and the animal's not going to eat while the lion's there? So again, the Gemara says what more could you prevent an animal from eating than sticking a lion right there? Again, are you not allowed to thresh your animal if there happens to be a lion nearby? What if you put up its offspring nearby, where it means, okay, again, I'm not really sure, but I guess the point is the animal's going to be thinking about his own or her own young, and therefore not going to eat because either it's distracted or worrying about the young, maybe thinking I shouldn't eat, I should give to my young. Okay. Sometimes when you're thirsty, the animal won't eat until they get water. And if you refrain from giving the animal water, is that considered that you're being chosem the animal? Parasta katbulia al gabe dishama. You put a leather mat on top so the animal can't actually get to the food. Is that considered chasima? To which the Gemara says, at least one of these we could have an answer to, although I did tell you there are no answers, and then you'll see there are no answers, but we think we have an answer to one of the questions. We're now going to talk about two cases where the owner of the animal is not the one who's doing the threshing, okay? Where we're going to have it like this. I own an animal and I rent it to you. That's the first case. So the bala para, when I rent you my animal and you're going to now thresh with it in my field, okay? Now, you can basically, no, sorry. I'm lending it to you to thresh in your field. Sorry, my mistake. I'm renting it to you, my animal, that you can thresh in your field. So if I want, I can lahariv parato. I can starve my animal before I give it to you. Kadesh tocham and so that when he goes to your field, the animal will eat a lot there and be, and then less when it gets home. That one wasn't relevant to our purposes, but the second one is. Rashai balabayat lahatil pikia amir lifnei abema kedei shelo tocha min hadisha harbe. Now, if I rent you an animal and you're going to thresh it, one second, the case is Shai balabayit, right. You bring your animal to thresh in my field. It's your animal. I can basically put out a whole thing of hay so that the animal won't eat a lot of the crops. So now what do you see here? I can do something, cover it, right? Because if I cover it with a row of hay, the animal will get to the hay and not to what's underneath. I can do that. So therefore, I could put this leather mat out. It's the same thing, but it's not really the same thing because number one, just because there's hay doesn't mean the animal won't get to what's underneath. A leather mat completely covers and doesn't allow you to get it all to the food. But if you have hay with, you can get, the animal can move through the hay and actually get to the food. And number two, also you could say, there's another reason to reject this from being approved. It doesn't necessarily mean the Pekia Amir is being thrown on top of the crops. It could be that you can feed your animal hay before, just like you can starve your animal before they get there, right? You can feed your animal before in order so that they not be so starved when they get to the threshing floor and they won't eat that much. But that has nothing to do with covering the threshing floor with a mat. So in the end, we don't have an answer to any of his questions. Another question. Rabbi Yonatan, Rabbi Simai. Rabbi Yonatan asked Rabbi Simai the following question. What Rabbi Yonatan is really focusing on is the wording in the pasuk. It says in the pasuk, "Lo tachsom shol b'disho." Don't muzzle an animal while it's threshing. So what if I muzzled the animal outside the threshing floor and then brought it into the threshing floor? Now, it sounds like a bit of a ridiculous question because you're muzzling your animal while it's eating. But he says, shor bidisho amarachmana. It says, don't muzzle a shore while it's threshing. So, vahala bidisho, but here you muzzled it when it wasn't threshing. Oh, Dilma, or perhaps the pasuk doesn't mean the simple reading of the pasuk. Maybe it means, lo tadush bechasima amarachmana. Don't thresh while it's muzzled. Okay, which is obviously the answer because it doesn't really make any sense. And in fact, he's going to be rejected. His whole question sort of, or is going to be answered in a way that it's kind of saying, what a ridiculous question you asked me. At least I think. So Rabbi Simai answers him, you learn from the house of your father. It says the kohanim are not allowed to drink wine or beer. It says, okay, let's read the literal reading. Wine or beer you shouldn't drink. You and your sons with you. When you come into the temple. So what does that mean? They can't drink when they're walking into the temple, but they could get stone drunk before and walk into the temple drunk, right? That's basically what he's going to say. What are you trying to say? They're only forbidden to drink on their way into the temple, but if they drank before and they're drunk, they can come in drunk. The Torah was all talking about, you have to separate between sanctity and non-sacred things. And of course, you can't walk into the temple drunk just because you drunk an hour ago or 30 minutes ago. That's not going to allow you to go in, which means what it means there, when you come in, you can't be in a state of drunkenness. Also here, when you're threshing, you can't be in a state of being muzzled. It doesn't matter when the muzzle was put on. Tanu Rabbanan. These are two different things. One is lachsom et hapara that we've been talking about, muzzling the animal. The other is, it says lo yachrosh b'shor uv'chamor yachdav. You can't take an ox and a donkey, two different animals, and have them plow together. They can't be together in the same thing because it's called kilayim for behemot, for animals. But if you do just the chasima, you just put a muzzle on an animal, but you don't bring it to thresh, or you put two animals together in a yoke, but you don't actually leave them to do the plowing, two different animals. So if you do that, you're patur, you're exempt. But if you didn't do the chasima, or you didn't put the animals together in the yoke, but you're the one who pulled the yoke, pull the animals to go do the threshing, and you're out to the plowing, and you're the one who took the muzzled animal and did the threshing with the animal, then you're the one who's going to be obligated. So again, the focus being on the action of the threshing, whereas the muzzling could have been done before, even by somebody else. Last issue for today, itmar. Chasama bikol v'inhiga bikol. If you muzzle the animal, not with a muzzle, but you say, don't eat, and the animal listens to you because he knows your voice and knows understands what you're saying, or hinhiga bikol, or you led the animals to the threshing floor, to the plowing, to plow the field, also with your words. You didn't actually pull the two different animals, but you led it with words. Rabbi Yochanan amar chayav, Rish Lakish amar patur. The big machloket here, are you liable or not? Rabbi Yochanan amar chayav, akimat piv havya maaser. Moving your mouth, saying words, is an action. Rish Lakish amar patur, kala lo havya maaser. Rish Lakish says, speech is not an action. This is a famous issue that comes up in many cases. And in fact, I wanted to point out to you that if you look in Sefer Dvarim, chapter 25, where the Lo Tachsom Shor B'Disho pasuk appears, the psukim right before it, and it's even considered in the same section, Ki Yerid Ben Anashim, if there's a fight between people, V'Nigshol HaMishpat U'Shvatum, and they go and they get judged, V'Tzdiku Tatzadik V'Shiur Tarasha, and they make they say, you're right, you're wrong. V'Ayan Ben Akot HaRasha, and then when you hit the Rasha, this is what we learn about lashes. When someone's supposed to get punished, you give them lashes. 40 lashes, no more, which really we learn to be 39. We don't want something to happen, and maybe it's too much. And then it says, Lo tachsom shor b'disho. The juxtaposition of these psukim leads the rabbis to say that from the pasuk Lo tachsom shor b'disho, we learn all the laws of malchut. In order to get lashes, it has to be like Lo tachsom shor b'disho. Number one, a lo taseh. Number two, a lo taseh with an action associated with it. It's very famous in Makkah. We're going to get to a lav she'ein bo maaser. You don't get malchut for. What's a lav she'ein bo maaser usually? One you use speech for. And in fact, there's a problem Tosfot raises that Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish seem to be on the other sides of this debate in a different situation. He explains Rabbi Yochanan is saying, Rabbi Yochanan here says, speech gets you lashes here, but it's because your speech caused an action. In other words, your speech ended up preventing the animal you muzzled. You actually did, right? Something came out of your words. It wasn't just words and something intangible came out, but something actual, an actual action happened. That's what Tosfot explains Rabbi Yochanan in light of some other sugya that he says. And Rish Lakish says you're patur because he says, Kala lo have maaser. In this case, you're speaking, right? Maybe also Rish Lakish distinguishes here between other kinds of speech because, maybe the animal's not going to listen to you. You're not really preventing the animal, right? The animal, just because you spoke, the animal could go ahead and eat whatever the animal wants. And therefore, you're patur. Okay, we're going to continue with this discussion tomorrow. That's it for today. So let's review. We started with this big debate between the contradiction between the two sources, truma and maaser, is if the animal's dash truma maaser, is there a prohibition to muzzle or not? From there, we moved on to, right, we had all different options of how to resolve the contradiction between them. Then we went to if it's not good for the animal. In the end, we said, well, then you can muzzle the animal if the food isn't healthy for the animal. Then we had, is there an issue of amir la'akum? Can you tell a Gentile to thresh with your animal with the mouth muzzled? We don't know in the end whether we allow it or not. We didn't have an answer to that question. Then we had all of Rami bar Hama's questions. If the animal was somehow somewhat prevented by some other external thing, would that be an issue or not? We didn't have an answer to his questions either. We tried to answer one, but didn't succeed. Then, then we had, what if you did the chasima outside and then you brought it to thresh, which of course we thought that was a ridiculous question. Of course, that's a problem because the animal is muzzled while it's threshing. Again, this all goes back to, it's the literal, lo tachsom shor b'disho really means lo tadush b'chasima, okay? It's not don't muzzle the animal while it's threshing, it's don't thresh while the animal is muzzled, even though that's not the simple reading of the pasuk, but that's how they clearly explain it, and it makes sense that way. And then we had the last question about if you muzzle the animal with your words, is that considered muzzling or not? With that, we finish today's daf, wishing everybody a good day.